So 2024 has came and went, and with it some interesting films. This was the first year after the strikes, and I think you could feel it, at least with major releases, but there have been some pretty incredible films. As is tradition, I will be doing a top 24, partly because doing a top 10 is boring, and also I just need to speak about more films. As always, I'll be going off of UK release dates, or some films that I got to see at festivals. However, there are a few films which haven't had a release here, and a few which had 2024 releases but elsewhere were released before. And before I get into the list, I want to give a few honourable mentions because, again, there was just so many good films. The Apprentice, All We Imagine Is Light, Society of the Snow, The Sweet East, and Sing Sing. But without further ado, let's get to the list. Number 24, Will and Harper, an ode to pure and true friendship, an utterly beautiful documentary that feels like it should be essential viewing for a large part of our world. Number 23, Inside Out 2, manages like the first to have such neurologically complex ideas and boil them down to easy to understand, and more importantly, fun, creative imaginings. This film just adds on to the creativity of this world in such unique ways. Number 22, His Three Daughters. What might take a little bit to get going and establish these women as real people instead of caricatures really ends up being quite a profound and beautiful study of the different ways grief affects people. Gorgeously delicate and very raw and honest. The more this went on, the more I find myself really with the family, sharing such a small space. Number 21, National Anthem. Simply in love with the way this looked and felt, the warmth and kindness was so ever present and tangible. Such a unique and special story with some of the most natural acting I've seen in a while. Number 20, Snack Shack. Was endlessly charmed by this coming of age flick, which got not nearly enough attention it should have. Number 19, I Saw the TV Globe. Just absolutely devastating and such an original and harrowing way to express a queer story. I love this blend of in-world realism and how that correlated metaphorically with queerness in our reality. Such a fascinating depiction of this subject which felt simultaneously engrossing in-world and just as layered and dense to our world. Number 18, Dee Dee. I was so invested in this and emotionally moved throughout, but I don't think I've ever seen an ending scene so normal that hit me like a truck like this. Sean Wang has created such a beautiful ode to this period of time and the messy feelings of childhood. He manages to show such real relationships as well. It's hard to find your place in the world, and this film expertly expressed and captured those feelings. Number 17, Conclave. Just a really solid and engaging political thriller. The setting makes for such devastating blows and oddly an extremely timely movie. Weirdly, you could abstract the fact that this revolves around religion and paint any sort of opposing ideologies, and it would work. The film works as well as it does as it's concerned with issues prevalent both in the church and also in wider society. Number 16, The Iron Claw. I adore how this film, while tragic all the way through, didn't allow you to process or release until Efron's character was ready to. It makes the final moments so emotionally devastating. Such an emotionally powerful film, and the beating heart of this is how brilliantly it captured sibling relationships. It was very refreshing to have a film which is very masculine challenge these ideas and highlight how destructive and oppressive archetypes of what masculine should be and the repercussions of such horrid pressures. Number 15, It's What's Inside. I'm kind of blown away by this as it's a feature film debut. It's so well realised and has such a distinctive visual and narrative voice that it feels like it's been made by a well-established filmmaker. Not only is this a directorial debut, but Greg Jardin also wrote and edited the movie. The talent is nuts. It's a testament to creative storytelling as I was equally invested in the story, but also how it's going to be presented to the viewer. Number 14, Love Lies Bleeding. From a filmmaking perspective, this film is near flawless. I was in awe of just how confident and controlled this felt for all of its runtime. The score, the fluidity of the camera, the cinematography, the lighting, all culminated into making this atmospheric setting that transported you into such a brilliant story. It's unapologetically sexy and horny, and manages to also be horrifying and brutal. I love this dichotomy and how it beautifully straddled the line between the two. The film uses intimacy in such an intelligent way to go between these extremes. At moments it's alluring, in others it's visceral. Just such a cool through line to keep you on edge. Number 13, The Greatest Hits. Really blown away by this gem, which seemed to have been missed by a lot of people. It works as a lamentation on grief and love, and the power of music to hurt or heal, all while under this cool time travel narrative, but in a metaphorical sense. I love how this was about being pulled into the past or dreaming of a future instead of living in the present. Number 12, We Live in Time. Endlessly charming and oddly so soft and uplifting. It's equally devastating and emotional, but that I was expecting. What I wasn't expecting was to be so wrapped up and swept off my feet by the relationship. That's on me for not expecting this. Put together two of the most charming human beings and most talented actors working in cinema together on the big screen. It's no surprise that I was so enamored by the relationship. Holding space before my top 10 is Wicked, which I'm honestly surprised is ranked as high as it did, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't emotionally moved by this film. It's only as high as it is because of the lead performances. Cynthia Erivo is mind-bogglingly talented as a vocalist and a performer. She's commanding when she's on screen. Standing side by side with Erivo is Ariana Grande Butera, who is simply magnificent. Her comedic abilities are second to none, from her wild, old Hollywood style of comedy, played very much in her movements, to her incredible vocal affectations in near every word. She's a scene stealer, someone you are just unable to keep your eyes away from. It's a strange job to attempt to balance the inherent campiness which comes from musical theatre and adapting that into a film which deals with serious subject matter, but I think Chu did a wonderful job at this. It never really feels cringy or out of place. He strikes a really wonderful balance and really gets you invested in this story. It's powerful that a film like this is able to balance such quiet moments of intimacy with loud, hyper-energetic scenes. It's able to balance comedy with heaviness. I think the messaging of this movie is perhaps a message which comes at the right time. It's perhaps always needed. It's maybe a simplistic message, but it doesn't make it any less valid. And that is all my movies before my top 10, so let's get into the top 10 now. Luca Guadagnino's second outing last year was heartbreaking. Daniel Craig's performance is simply the embodiment of loneliness, something I think is very hard to showcase authentically on screen, but I truly thought it was shown so beautifully and real. He has so many vices which are all attempts to fill this hole inside him. He's constantly drinking, he's dabbled with drugs, he uses sex casually, and he has this obsession to find this drug which is a manifestation of his inability to find anybody in his life who truly understands him. He's went through life without a single meaningful relationship. Is this made apparent in the film? No, but I think it's overtly obvious through Lee's desperation to find a real meaningful partner. The character of Lee is only made as interesting as he is through Craig's magnetism in drawing you into this man's life. It's a wonderfully nuanced performance which is so layered and complicated, but perfectly gets across who this man is. The awkward, embarrassing moments feel so natural as he attempts to court this man who he believes likes him. The raw and harrowing melancholy that graces his character when he's alone. He feels well realised and authentic in a short period of time you understand who Lee is. I love how versatile Luca's filmography is, and I really appreciated this foray into surrealism. I honestly think this is quite a nice introduction to surrealism as well. The ghostly touches just enhancing the feelings of longing. The almost Lynchian ending, which again, not hard to understand, but just exemplified themes in a beautiful way. And the gorgeous drug sequence. I don't know if I've seen love portrayed in such a hauntingly beautiful way before. The feeling of wanting someone so bad, you no longer want their touch, but you want to feel them from the inside. I heard a lot of buzz around this movie, but the trailers never really sold me on it. Really loved the cast, the animation looked beautiful, but the story from the trailers never really sold me. Well, I was wrong. The movie is gorgeous and such a mature children's film. Feels very much akin to a Pixar film, which is not a slight at DreamWorks, but more so in its darker messaging and themes. It just feels more in line with the other studio's output. The film is filled with such charm and personality, love and compassion, that once you're immersed in this world, it's very easy for them to pull on you emotionally. The voice acting work from everyone is wonderful, but wow, Lupita delivers such a nuanced performance, somehow making a robotic voice soften over time and gain compassion, while still remaining stiff. Truly some impressive work. The animation is stunning, love the more textured feel to the way characters were animated. It's also just got some beautiful use of camera work which shows off the animation in the best possible way. Seriously was blown away by this and did find myself bawling at a goose flying. I have a whole video essay on this film, so safe to say I enjoyed it. I honestly think this film has been completely overlooked by people. Yorgos is so successful at making movies that actively want you to be critically thinking both during and after the film finishes, as he's able to balance entertainment and captivating stories with just wild scenarios. The fables he concocts here are just truly bizarre, but not without purpose. There's meaning behind his madness. The title of the film is incredibly smart, as by the second story you're starting to grasp what the connective tissue between these vignettes is. In this, we are exploring kindness in our society in various ways, but I think more so the perversions of kindness. What's so incredibly fun about Yorgos' work is that all of this heaviness and tackling of dark and shied away from themes is packaged in such strange and wonderful stories which are simultaneously entertaining. It's thought-provoking cinema, and it's pushing the boundaries on what gets into cinemas. If you want more of a breakdown on why exactly I love this movie, I highly recommend checking out my video essay on it, which I will link in the description. So this is absolutely not what I expected going into this, and I mean that in such a positive way. From the trailers and the buzz surrounding Anora, what with winning the Palm, and also just the sheer acclaim it had with critics, I expected something quite Oscar baity, something gritty and harrowing which really dives into the complexities of sex work. We start off and the film presents itself as a rom-com of sorts, but as you're sitting there enjoying yourself, you're just waiting for the pin to drop. And it never does. Or rather, it drops in a different way. I don't think I've been so thrown off by a comedy, but I was howling throughout this. It's near perfect situational comedy, and I imagine if you're a fan of overlapping dialogue, this will resonate so well. What's more is it still manages to pack a punch by the end. The final scene manages to recontextualize the entire film and lands with such power. It's truly special. In a film full of chaos, a simple moment of quiet is really disarming and stunning. It's not to say the rest of the film is devoid of message before the ending, it's all there. It just becomes more impactful once it's finished. It's a testament to Mikey Madison's flawless performance that in the moment you go between deep empathy for the character and being taken aback by the sheer comedic genius of her. Sean Baker really has something special here. I've been a massive fan of his work, and this just adds to his wonderful filmography. It's really something special to witness real humans on screen who have complexities and flaws just like everyone. It's a showcase of a real person packaged into a really funny narrative. This feature film debut from Will Seifert is spectacular and honestly very hard to believe it's a debut. It's a piece of work which feels steeped in history, as evident by the copious amounts of research needed to document a period of time which would have been relatively unreported on, but it also feels so human. The story being told, while constrained to the period of history it takes place in, feels so relevant to queer stories now. I don't think there's a single moment in history since this point where a story like this wouldn't be relevant. While the film deals specifically with testicular transplants, something I was completely unaware of, it speaks to the larger idea of conversion therapy, and perhaps more relevant to us now is the idea of internal conversion, and that being either forced upon queer people by society at large, by other queer people who are uncomfortable in their own queerness, or by ourselves. The relevancy of this film lies simply in this being a complicated queer story. For the majority of the film, 3 queer characters are explored, who are all well realised and have differing perspectives on their queerness. No queer person is the same, and no queer experiences. I think in stories of the past, an idea of a monolithic queer person is created in some lesser films. It was entirely refreshing to see how each of these men dealt with their queerness, and while it is historical, I think it speaks volumes that this type of story is relevant today. The film doesn't shy away from the darkness which faced queer people at the time, and yet it also doesn't neglect the light which was also found. It's something so admirable about this film is that it tells its story plainly and allows subject matter to dictate your feelings. There's moments of true horror in here, stuff that will make you squirm, but there's also moments of tenderness, of human expression, scenes which highlight the beauty of queer love. If you had told me within the first act the feelings I would have by the end of this film, I wouldn't have believed you. What a monumental movie. Starting as this incredibly gripping thriller, the film spirals into a deep, unflinching look into human nature and the horrors of societal opinions on the minds of children. I really thought I had a read on where this film was going, and it was going to be some surface level read on how we shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but it went in a completely different direction, and I'm so grateful. I left this film so moved, both deeply upset and also comforted. I think this is a film which many queer people will be able to find some sort of semblance in, both explicit and implicit pressures on you to be a certain way that anything to the opposite manifests itself as something unnatural. Really adored how layered the title of this film is. It's doing so much with the word monster. Every person is a monster or views someone as such, and it's just so interesting to view each of them through this lens. I think this is especially powerful when we see the film through the children's eyes and suddenly the mother figure is in a different light. What's even more fascinating is how her dialogue is not malicious, but viewed through the eyes of a child who's feeling self-hatred. It only compounds this. Sadly, these micro comments are all too common in society, and if you extrapolate how a child feels in this situation, imagine that child experiencing this daily. No wonder it would shift how you view yourself. I was profoundly moved by this film. It manages to be so thrilling and so delicate, a true wonder. Still lost for words by how this film made me feel. I think a lot of films which aim to be introspective on the Nazis feels very much like they take the approach of casting them as them. This film doesn't allow you to compartmentalize them as others, as it is so much about human nature as it is a film about the Nazis. It's a completely uncomfortable watch on the banality of horror. I simply adored the pacing in this film as it allowed you to live in the horror no matter how uncomfortable this was. So many lines just stung and had me contemplating so much, and the film gives you space to do so. When writing villains, you always hear that the villain is never the villain of their own story, and this film perfectly explores this idea. It's so normal, and that's where this horror lies. The complete disassociation from what's going on makes you wonder if we're ever able to tell in the moment if what we're doing is evil. It's not even a refusal to accept what's going on around them, it's a dismissal. It's a quick thought and then it's gone. When the thoughts are allowed to sit and not be dismissed, much like the film, that's where the realization of the atrocities committed become real. Also, the sound design, phenomenal. What's so impressive about The Holdovers is how it shines in its simplicity. It's a pretty standard story of found family, but it's so pure and effortless in its execution, it might as well be one of the best versions of this story put to screen. The film feels plucked right out of the 70s, both in its filmmaking, which is just gorgeously crisp, and perfectly captures the isolation of the school and the warmth found through people, and in its characterization. It's such a wildly genius move to place this story in the 70s. It just weirdly fits this time period. The story would be so different had it been modern. Letting all characters deal with isolationism in this way, not in an ever-connected and yet isolated in a different way we live now, allows the exploration of self far more than a modern film would allow. I find what people are saying to be so true. This is a new classic, and it's rare we get a film like that now. I didn't realise how emotionally moved I would be. I spent a solid half of this film glass-eyed and burst out sobbing on multiple occasions. I really just find this film so moving, and it's not explicit like many films which pull on you are. It's all in subtleties of acting, the little lines of dialogue, and how we slowly learn more about these characters as they do about each other. This screenplay is near flawless. I think Paul is one of the most brilliantly conceived characters in cinema of recent, just utterly perfect in every line, and his journey was so fun to watch. This clearly wouldn't be near as good were it not for Paul Giamatti's incredible performance. I have no idea how this performance could be so comedic and yet harbour such deep emotion under everything he says. Giamatti makes him feel so realised that when he does these small little things, I was sobbing. Dominic Sessa was also wonderful, and his dynamic with Giamatti was just so fun to watch. I mean, he was honestly as strong as him. He made comedy and sadness blend so well. I mean, the standout is Divine Joy Randolph, however. Wow, she is not as much to work with, but everything she did I felt so deeply. I really just felt as if I was viewing reality. She had a way of just making everything she did feel so natural, and what a performance. So I had a really hard time choosing between my top two, but I think this just got beat slightly. Genuinely hard to express what I felt watching this film. We are witnessing the birth of not the next franchise, but an epic. It's the only word I think which is deserving of this film. It's an epic in every conceivable way. It's scary how unfiltered and passionate every single element of this film feels. It's clear how much care was put into everything, from the grand vistas to even the smallest grain of spice. Part of the reason the film works as much as it does is the unbelievable cinematography from Greg Fraser. I have sang this man's praises for a while, but my god, he's outdone himself in this film. His close-ups, which are not something I've given him credit before, are gorgeous and utilised to perfection. When the film calls for a more intimate and complex moment, we get real close to the characters and are left to read them all on our own. It's no surprise that his cinematography is wonderful even when it's not in close-ups. He has such an eye for colour and scale. When we go to Getty Prime and we see the black and white scenes and the transition from colour, I was in shock. The opening action sequence under the eclipse with the harsh orange contrasted by the black of the suits. So many scenes just had me in complete disarray as to what was on screen. He is an unrivaled talent and a master of his discipline. It's hard to speak about this movie without speaking about the acting of literally every single actor. To start with the main man himself, Lil Timmy Tim gives possibly his best performance. Paul in this film is so nuanced and complex, and Timmy handles all of his complexities with such ease. It's such a fascinating arc continuing from the first part as he slowly loses himself to power. He's soft in moments he needs to be and ruthless in others, helming an epic, especially when the majority of the runtime as Paul is no easy task, but he makes it look so simple. The counterpart to Paul is Zendaya's Chani, who thankfully is just as nuanced and well realised. I adored her journey of skepticism and how messy her relationship with Paul became. I was honestly shocked I bought into their love as much as I did, because normally this kind of stuff annoys me when it's just not properly set up. Not only did I adore their slow build of love and how it's shown from both perspectives of them falling in love, but it's a testament to how well acted both of these characters are that I truly believed they were in love. I think this story not only serves as an epic to get lost in, but also as such pertinent and relevant musings on religion and the horrors and dangers of faith. It's thematically something I've rarely witnessed in cinema, let alone a blockbuster. Obviously this is a testament to the original source material, but also to the screenwriters who were able to translate this idea so clearly. It also touches upon how enchanting the idea of being a savior is, and the addiction of having people willingly give you power. Power transpiring through class, and how the wealthy seed their beliefs in those who are less wealthy in order to keep things the way that they are is beyond fascinating, especially when you look at this through the lens of our current society. So in reality, this was always going to be my top spot. I've watched this film 6 times last year. I just couldn't get enough of this story and the characters Guadagnino put to screen. Guadagnino understands intimacy like no other working director at the moment, and often the sexiness of this film comes from conversation. What's so obvious is how much he thrives in subtext. Not a single scene in this film feels superfluous. All of them are necessary, and more interestingly, scenes are just presented to you. You have to pick how to feel. It's funny, I feel like drawing a comparison between this and Anyone But You, another film last year who attempted to be sexy. Far and away, this is more sexually charged, and it features less physical intimacy than that movie. I think the reason this film is so provocative is because it feels real. These relationships that the triangle is going through feel lived in. We feel the yearning and tension each of them feel for each other. It's in this realism that the film becomes so damn sexy. It's not polished, it doesn't feel like big name stars falling in love. These people are grimy and complex and real, and what's more compelling than watching real love? Guadagnino has so much control over each and every frame in the film. It's actually so stunning to witness. Challengers does not play it safe either. There's weird and bizarre and incredible cinematography choices. I mean, we become a bloody tennis ball for goodness sake. A really unpredictable score, a plethora of characters who make bad choices and definitely not morally righteous. He makes all of these bold choices, but everything feels so controlled. It's genuinely so impressive, and it just makes for a far more entertaining experience as you never know what is around the next corner. Speaking of the score, I really just need to gush a little more about this. I feel like the world is acutely aware of how monumental this score is, considering it became a TikTok audio and I was in a restaurant where they were playing it. It's clear the world loves this score, and rightly so. Without the score, this film would still be great, but it could have easily fallen into another sports drama. The score makes such a dramatic impact to the story and the tone of this film. It's because of this that I've been debating whether or not this has been the most interesting use of the score in this century. Like, maybe that's being hyperbolic, but it truly does so much for the film. Suddenly, instead of breaking away from the game is always continued off the court. Our characters are never not at odds. I think it says a lot about Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who have produced some of the best scores over the last decade. that this might be their best score since The Social Network. It's very hard to not mention the powerhouse performances. Zendaya is commanding. She plays a really complicated individual with this lived-in embodiment, which is just so wonderful to watch. A character you want to sink your teeth into and learn more about. Mike Weiss is wonderfully charming and smarmy. I think he's probably the easiest to dismiss on first viewing as having the least complexity, because the other two are so in your face. But upon further viewing, he is just as detailed, but he works more in the background. Josh O'Connor was unreal. Such a brilliant and layered performance. He has a character whiplash, like the others, but there's something about seeing him as a smarmy, overly confident teenager, and then where he goes, that is so compelling. What I find even more wonderful is how underneath him that smarmy teenager is still there, and when he rekindles with who he used to be, he starts to behave like he used to. It's such a good performance. I feel like you could walk out and feel so many different ways about each of the three characters, and you'd be valid to do so. Initially, I wasn't really walking out thinking someone was a villain, and honestly, I still don't. I think it's such a reductive way to view the film as people being either a villain or hero. The most interesting reality is that all of them are so morally grey. I haven't stopped thinking about this film and honestly have ever-changing opinions on how I read it, and I think that's a sign of a masterpiece. I'm also in the middle of writing a video essay on this, so keep an eye out for a video. And there you have it, my favourite films of 2024. And honestly, there's a bunch of films that didn't make this list that were great. It was that good a year for films. I'd love to know what your favourite films were in the comments below. Also, very excited to announce that I have started a podcast called Plot to Go, which is live where you listen to podcasts. So if you want to hear a more unfiltered conversation around the best films of the year, our first episode is live. Keep an eye out on the Insta and TikTok over the next few weeks, as I'll be doing lists of the best performances, scenes, TV shows, and more. And before you go, don't forget to let me know what you found in frames.